Turbo Challenge series is one of the most popular on the Amiga, and is also my favorite racing game series in general. That's right, I like it much more than Mario Kart. Now, let's start off with the original. This was not only on the Amiga, but also the Atari ST, Commodore 64, and even the ZX Spectrum. Unfortunately, I can't talk about the other versions since I don't have them. Presentation-wise, this game is phenomenal. Considering this game came out in 1990 for a home computer from 1987, this would make anyone shit their pants. Saying the graphics were ahead of their time would be a huge understatement. I mean, just look at this 3D model. That looks a million times better than Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, and that came several years later. Of course, now I'm going to talk about the music. Take a guess what I think of it. Or better yet, just listen to this. Oh yeah! I love the music in this game. It's not the best soundtrack in the world, but the songs are still catchy as hell. Now the gameplay. It's a pretty standard racing game. You go all over the world racing in different environments. The default controls I found difficult to use, but thankfully the game allowed me to alter them. However, I feel this game has two major problems. The first one is how whenever you bump into something, you come to a complete stop and it takes a while to get up to full speed again. Now this makes sense, but the problem is, it is practically impossible not to crash into something in this game. It can be ridiculously tight. The other problem with this game is that it just doesn't have a great amount of variety, and therefore can become a bit monotonous. Other than that, if you like old school racing games, this is one you should pick up. You're probably wondering how I could complain so much about the first game in my favorite racing game series. That's because things would only get better. That's right, I'm talking about Lotus Turbo Challenge 2. Hell yeah! This game is a complete and utter masterpiece. Now, the first thing you'll hear is one of the most popular Amiga songs, and one of the best in my personal opinion. Be warned. This will be stuck in your head for a long, long time. This is freaking epic! Now, I honestly don't think the graphics are quite as good as the original, but damn, this game has charm. Plus, unlike the original, this game is far from monotonous. There is a ton of variety. I should also mention that this game is hard. Even on the first level, it can be undeniably brutal. The reason why it's so hard is obvious to those who have played it. The time limits are strict. You'll often get to the checkpoint at the last possible second, if at all. Overall, this is a game I would definitely recommend. If you have an Amiga, you should look into getting this. And if you don't have one, it's a good reason to get one. After that, there was none other than Lotus 3 The Ultimate Challenge, which, ironically, was the easiest in the series. The first two games are actually quite distant from each other. What this game does is take what was great about its predecessors and throws it all into a blender. It has the variety and charm from Lotus 2, and it has gameplay elements from both, such as the pit system from the original and the environmental hazards from the second. This game also has a good level editor, which was essentially a password generator. You can select an environment and control how tight the turns are, the amount of turns there are, the amount of hills, the obstacles in the road, how long the course is, and etc. Each option would actually represent a letter in the password system, and therefore this game actually has an excuse for having long passwords. This is also good for sharing your custom courses with your friends, something several games do today. Again, the Amiga was ahead of its time. Then there's the music. God, that's awesome. My only problem with this game is that it's just not as fast as Lotus 2, and therefore it feels a bit sluggish in comparison. Overall, I feel this game is incredible, but still not as good as Lotus 2. This was also on the DOS computer, simply named Lotus The Ultimate Challenge. It isn't as good, but still is a very entertaining experience. Now, let's look at some of the ports. There was a Lotus trilogy for the Amiga CD32, which was basically the first 3 games in one CD. However, they changed the soundtrack for the first game and the third game. They wouldn't dare touch the second. A wise choice. The new soundtracks are okay. However, they don't match the awesomeness of the original versions at all. I don't have the game or a CD32, but from what I've seen, the gameplay looks intact. Lotus Turbo Challenge for the Sega Genesis is actually a port of Lotus Turbo Challenge 2. Might as well start off with the best one, huh? Anyway, ports of Amiga games to consoles, especially the Genesis, were usually crap. It should also be noted that the Genesis sound card uses M5 synthesis, unlike the samples of the Amiga or Super Nintendo. Therefore, Genesis games often sound crappier. Remember, I said often, not always. Since this is a port, and looking at what they did to that, let's be prepared to cover our ears in agony. Okay, this is a wonderful sign. The game sounds great, the graphics look almost as good as the original, and the gameplay looks identical! With that pleasant surprise, let's go ahead and play the game. Holy freaking crap, this is even harder than the Amiga version. I'm not joking. While the Amiga version was ridiculously tough, this one is horrifyingly brutal. Other than that, this is a great port. Not quite as good as the Amiga version, but still a very fun game to play, especially with a second player. On the Genesis, Lotus 3 was renamed Lotus 2 RACS, obviously referring to the level editor. In almost every way, this game is even better than the Amiga version. Remember how I said my only complaint about the original Lotus 3 was how slow it was in comparison? This one is on steroids. If you want a good racing game on Genesis, get this game now!